The air in the courtroom hangs thick and still, smelling faintly of old paper and desperation. My hands, clasped tight under the table, are slick with sweat despite the chill seeping from the marble floor. Across the room, he sits, a picture of smug confidence, whispering to his lawyer. He catches my eye, a flicker of something cold and triumphant in his stare, a look I've seen before, usually right before he thinks he's won. This time, though, his victory lap is premature. He built this gilded cage for me, brick by brick, using my own hands to lay the mortar. Now I watch him from inside it, not trapped, but waiting. The judge clears her throat, the sound echoing in the sudden silence, and I brace myself. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about whether the poison he injected into my life finally kills me, or if I find the antidote here, in this sterile, unforgiving room. If you've ever felt completely blindsided, like the ground just vanished beneath you, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before felt solid, predictable. Maybe a little boring sometimes, if I'm being honest, but stable. We had a routine, a comfortable rhythm built over 15 years. He worked his corporate job, the kind of finance gig that sounded impressive but mostly involved spreadsheets and long hours. I had launched my startup a few years back. It was small at first, just an idea scratched onto a napkin in a coffee shop, but it grew. It didn't just grow, it exploded. Suddenly, we weren't just comfortable, we were rich. Or, more accurately, my company was rich. Profits soared, beyond anything I'd imagined. Money flowed into our joint accounts, paying off the mortgage, funding renovations we'd only dreamed of, building a cushion that felt soft and safe. He was proud, or he seemed to be. He'd talk about my success at parties, puffing out his chest a little. My success was our success, he'd say. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? This was the man I'd built a life with, shared secrets with, planned a future with. The money was just a tool to make that future brighter, easier. We talked about investments, about securing our retirement, maybe buying a small place by the coast one day. He handled most of the larger financial decisions, the big transfers, the investments. It made sense, he was the finance guy. I was the entrepreneur, busy running the actual business, steering the ship through the choppy waters of rapid growth. I trusted him implicitly with the map and the compass. That was my first mistake. Not trusting him, but trusting him implicitly, blindly, without ever looking at the map myself. The first crack appeared not with a bang, but a whisper. A notification on my phone, a ping from an account I rarely checked, a legacy account holding some older investments. It was a small transfer, a few $1,000s labeled vaguely. Nothing alarming on its own, easily dismissed. But then another and another, always small, always vague labels. Like pebbles dropped into still water, the ripples were tiny at first, barely disturbing the surface. I asked him about them. He'd shrug, offer a casual explanation, moving some funds around, rebalancing, tax optimization. His explanations were smooth, coded in the jargon of his world, a world I didn't entirely navigate. I accepted them. He was the finance guy, after all. Then came the condo. Not a whisper, but a shout. A registered letter arrived at the house. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to him. A formal notification about property taxes on a newly acquired property. I picked it up from the mailbox, turning it over in my hands, a strange weight settling in my gut. We hadn't bought property. We were happy in our house, had just finished the renovations. Whose property? I opened it. A condo downtown. A luxury building I recognized, the kind with a doorman and a pool on the roof. The address wasn't ours. The name on the tax bill was his. And another name. A woman's name. My breath hitched. I didn't know this woman. The address wasn't ours. The property wasn't ours. Not ours. His. And hers? My hands trembled as I read the details, the purchase date, recent, the assessed value. Over $1 million. A figure that made my head swim. My startup's profits had just cleared a significant milestone, hitting 8 figures in revenue. We had discussed reinvesting, expanding. Had he used that money? For this? For a condo with another woman? The world tilted. Everything I thought was solid, stable, safe, crumbled into dust. The air went cold, thin. I couldn't breathe. My vision narrowed to the paper in my hands, the cold, hard proof of a life I hadn't known existed, running parallel to mine. The pebbles in the water weren't tiny ripples. They were the leading edge of a tsunami. The small transfers, the vague explanations, they weren't rebalancing. They were bleeding money, siphoning off the very lifeblood of the future I was building, not just for us, but with another woman in mind. When he got home that night, I was waiting. The letter lay on the kitchen counter between us, an indictment in white paper. His smile, the one he usually greeted me with, faltered and died when he saw my face, saw the paper. He knew. In that instant, without a single word spoken, I saw the truth in his eyes. Not just the condo, not just the money, but the betrayal, deep and complete, a chasm opening between us that swallowed everything we'd ever built. His face went from recognition to something else, something guarded, then aggressive. He didn't deny it. He didn't confess or beg forgiveness. He attacked. "What are you doing going through my mail?" he demanded, his voice tight, accusatory. As if that was the crime. As if reading a tax bill for $1 million condo he bought with another woman, using money I earned, was a violation. The air crackled. My own voice, when it came, was a stranger's, low and shaking. "What is this?" I asked, pushing the letter towards him. "Who is she? What is this condo?" He sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound, as if I was being unreasonable. "It's an investment," he said, fumbling for words, the smooth finance veneer cracking. "A diversification. A diversification with another woman's name on the tax bill?" The stranger's voice was getting stronger, sharper. "Using money for my company? Our money." He straightened up, his chin lifting, pulling on that mask of corporate control. "It's my money too," he said, his voice hardening. "We're married. My income, your income, it's all ours. And yes, some of the funds came from accounts that hold some of your company's profits, but it's a solid investment. Property values downtown. Don't you dare mansplain real estate to me right now." I cut him off, my voice rising. "Don't you dare talk about investment strategy. You bought $1 million apartment for your mistress with my money." He flinched at the word mistress, but recovered quickly. "She's not my mistress," he said, though his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "She's complicated." Complicated. $1 million condo complicated. My entire life felt complicated, twisted into a grotesque shape I no longer recognized. The argument escalated, spiraling out of control, ugly words exchanged like weapons. He grew colder, his defenses hardening. He accused me of being controlling, of being obsessed with my work, of neglecting him. The classic narrative of the cheating spouse, turning the blame onto the victim. Every accusation was a fresh stab wound, but beneath the pain, a cold, hard resolve began to form. He had used my success, my trust, to build a new life for himself, a secret life, funded by my efforts. He thought he was clever. He thought he was safe. The first few days were a blur of shock and pain. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The vibrant world of my startup, which had been my passion, my refuge, now felt tainted. Every financial report, every profit projection, was a reminder that this was the source of the money he'd siphoned away, the money that paid for his betrayal. My team noticed something was wrong. I was distant, distracted, operating on autopilot. I couldn't tell them. How could I? Oh, just dealing with the fact my husband bought his mistress a luxury condo with my company's profits, no biggie. I started digging. Quietly, late at night after he'd gone to bed, or when he was working late, which took on a whole new meaning. I accessed bank statements, investment portfolios, property records. The vague transfers weren't small after all, not cumulatively. They added up, bleeding the accounts linked to the business's earnings. The condo wasn't the only thing. There were lavish gifts, trips, designer clothes, all traced back to accounts funded by my company. He wasn't just having an affair, he was funding an entire second life on my dime. The cold resolve solidified into ice. Pain turned into a deep, burning anger. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had stolen from me, systematically and calculatingly. He saw my success not as something to share or celebrate, but as a personal ATM for his infidelity. He was counting on my trust, counting on my distraction with running the business, counting on the sheer audacity of his actions to perhaps scare me into submission or a quiet divorce. I knew I needed help. Not just emotional support, but legal. Finding the right lawyer felt like another impossible task in a world that had become unrecognizable. I couldn't just pick anyone from the phone book. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood complex finances, someone who wouldn't flinch at the messy reality of high-stakes betrayal. I found her through a referral, a woman named Elena Rossi. Her reputation preceded her, ruthless, brilliant, with a laser focus on financial cases. Her office was minimal, modern, and surprisingly calm. When I sat across from her, the story tumbling out of me in a rush of pain and indignation, her expression remained neutral, attentive. When I finished, the silence stretched. "He used your startup's profits," she stated, not a question. "Yes. The vast majority of the funds he used for the condo, and other things trace back to our joint accounts which hold significant profits from my company. Profits that were earned after we were married, yes, but generated by my business, my work, my employees." She nodded slowly. "Community property, assuming you're in a community property state. But the source of the funds, the nature of the transfers, the intent, this complicates things. Especially the condo. That's a clear, significant asset transfer. And the name on the deed. Hers." I finished, the name like ash in my mouth. "And his. Joint tenants." "Right," Elena said, a flicker of something cold in her eyes that mirrored my own growing resolve. "He's trying to shield assets. By putting her name on it, he complicates your claim to that specific property. It's crude, but not uncommon. He thinks he's protected it from you in a divorce." "He used my money," I repeated, the unfairness of it a physical weight on my chest. "We understand that," she said gently, but her voice was firm. "And we will prove it. The question is, how do we make this work for you? He wants a clean break, probably offering you a settlement based on what he thinks he owes you, while keeping his investments and his own assets safe." My stomach twisted. A clean break? After 15 years? After using my success to fund his infidelity? The thought of him walking away, perhaps even keeping that condo, left me feeling sick. "I don't want a settlement," I said, the words surprising even myself with their intensity. Elena looked up, her gaze sharp. "I don't want a percentage of what he deems fair. I want him to understand what he did. I want him to lose something he values, just as much as I valued my life, my trust, before he destroyed it." Elena leaned back, studying me. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Okay," she said. "Settlement is one path. Litigation is another. And in litigation, especially with demonstrated financial malfeasance like this, the court has significant discretion in dividing assets, even community property. Fraudulent transfer, breach of fiduciary duty within the marriage, these things matter." "He has his company," I said, thinking aloud. "He worked for a large investment firm, a senior partner. It was his identity, his pride. His share of the partnership, his future earnings, that's valuable." Elena's smile widened, no longer faint. It was predatory, very valuable, and less easily hidden than a condo purchased through layers of accounts. "Tell me everything about his company, his role, his income structure, his partnership agreements. Everything you know." The struggle shifted from internal despair to external warfare. The early days of the legal process were a baptism by fire. Mountains of documents appeared, financial statements, tax returns, property deeds, emails, texts. Elena's team was relentless, peeling back the layers of secrecy he'd built. Every discovery felt like a punch to the gut, confirming the depth of his deception. There were more names, more instances of spending, a pattern of behavior that went back further than I'd initially realized. It wasn't a recent lapse. It was a sustained, calculated campaign of lies and theft. He fought back, of course. His lawyer, a slick, aggressive man named Miller, painted me as an absent wife, consumed by her work, neglecting her husband, driving him into the arms of another. They argued that the funds he used were marital property, and he was simply investing it. The condo, they claimed, was a legitimate investment, and the other woman was simply a business partner. A business partner he was sleeping with and buying gifts for, apparently. The gaslighting was intense, designed to make me doubt myself, to feel shame for being successful, for being betrayed. Miller's tactics were brutal. Depositions were grueling interrogations, probing into the most intimate details of my marriage, my business, my life. They tried to undermine the value of my company, suggesting its success was volatile, unproven, implying I was the one who was financially reckless. They argued that his income and assets were entirely separate from mine, even though we'd pooled resources for years, even though he'd directly benefited from my success. Through it all, Elena was my shield and my sword. She countered every attack with cold, hard facts, backed by the paper trail. She didn't get drawn into the emotional drama Miller tried to create. She stayed focused on the finances, the documented flow of money from my business profits, through our joint accounts and into his secret life. The rising challenges came in waves. There were days I felt utterly broken, contemplating just giving him what he wanted, agreeing to a quiet settlement just to make it stop. The emotional toll was immense. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford, haunted by images of him with her, by the knowledge of his deceit, by the stress of the legal battle. My work suffered. The business, which had been thriving, felt the impact of my absence, my distraction. I had to pull back, delegate more, trust my team implicitly, just to keep it afloat while I fought this war on the home front. One particular low point came during a mediation session. Miller, with his condescending smirk, laid out their settlement offer. It was laughable, a pittance, framed as generous, conditional on my silence and agreement to a narrative that absolved him of blame. He sat there, across the table, watching me, that same cold, triumphant look in his eyes. He truly believed he had won. He believed he could buy his way out of this, keeping his company, his mistress, and his stolen assets, leaving me with crumbs and the wreckage of my life. He spoke then, directly to me, ignoring Elena. "This is more than fair," he said, his voice low and patronizing. "You need to be realistic. Your company is volatile. My position is stable. This offers you security. Just sign it. Let's be done." Something snapped inside me, not in anger, but in a chilling clarity. He didn't see me. He didn't see the woman who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. He saw a naive wife he could easily manipulate and discard. He underestimated me completely. And in that moment, sitting across from his arrogant face, I knew I wouldn't just refuse his offer. I would take everything from him. Not out of spite, or not just out of spite, but out of a fierce, protective instinct for myself, for everything I had built, for the principle of it. He weaponized my success and my trust. I would weaponize his own hubris. Elena watched me, her expression unreadable. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, devoid of emotion. "Thank you for your offer," I said, looking directly at him. "I decline." Miller started to protest, but Elena cut him off with a raised hand. "We will proceed to trial," she stated calmly. His face flickered with surprise, then annoyance. He hadn't expected that.
Good.
The midpoint shift came not with a bang, but with a quiet email late one night. Elena forwarded it to me with a cryptic subject line. Regarding the partnership agreement, it was an old document, buried deep in the discovery files, related to his initial buy-in as a senior partner at his firm. It detailed the terms of his partnership, the vesting schedule, the payout structure upon leaving the firm. And buried within the legalese was a clause. A small, seemingly insignificant clause about how his capital contribution and future earnings would be treated in the event of specific, detrimental actions that could harm the firm's reputation or financial stability. Actions like, say, using partnership accounts or firm resources, even indirectly through commingled marital funds, to facilitate an affair and a fraudulent asset transfer, which was now the subject of a high-profile, messy divorce case. Elena called me the next morning. Her voice, usually calm, held a note of excitement. "This changes things," she said. "Significantly. That clause, if we can prove he used funds traceable to his income or partnership distributions, even via the marital accounts, for the condo and the affair expenses, and if we can show how this divorce, specifically the details of the financial misconduct, could negatively impact his firm's reputation or operations, his partnership could be in jeopardy. And not just the partnership itself, but the valuation of his share upon dissolution. It could be significantly discounted. Or, under certain interpretations, even seized by the firm to cover potential damages or reputational harm." My mind raced. His company wasn't just his job, it was his golden goose, his status, his future security. He had spent years climbing that corporate ladder, sacrificing time, energy, everything for that partnership. He thought he was shielding his assets by diverting my money. But this clause, this tiny, overlooked detail in a document he probably signed without reading thoroughly years ago, could turn his most valuable asset into a liability, exposed and vulnerable precisely because of the actions he took with my money. This wasn't just about clawing back what he'd stolen. This was about the potential to impact the core of his financial world, his professional identity. The thought was intoxicating. Not in a malicious way, but in a purely strategic one. He thought he was playing checkers, moving pieces around to protect his king. But I had just discovered he was playing chess on a board I understood better than he did, and he had just left his most powerful piece completely exposed. The deepening crisis for him was just beginning. For me, this was the turning point. The fear dissipated, replaced by a cold, clear focus. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. He had brought this fight to my doorstep, thinking I would crumble. He had underestimated my resilience, my intelligence, and the sheer power of a woman protecting what is hers. We shifted strategies. No longer were we solely focused on proving the fraudulent transfers to recover funds or property. Now, the focus became proving the link between those transfers, his income/partnership funds, even if commingled, and the potential reputational damage to his firm. Elena's team dug deeper into his firm's internal regulations, their code of conduct, previous cases involving partners. We gathered evidence linking the timing of the transfers to specific profit distributions from my company, showing how my money flowed into the accounts he then used for the condo and other expenses. We prepared to argue that his actions constituted a breach of the partnership agreement, specifically the clause Elena had found. Meanwhile, his side seemed oblivious to the shift. Miller continued to focus on minimizing the value of my company and portraying me as difficult and unreasonable. They thought they were dealing with a standard divorce, albeit a high-asset one with some infidelity thrown in. They didn't see the trap being laid. They didn't see the quiet, meticulous work happening behind the scenes, tracing the poison money back to its source, and then following its path right to the heart of his most valued possession, his career, his stake in his company. The pressure mounted as the trial date approached. Every day was a marathon of meetings, document review, witness preparation. My life outside of the legal battle became a distant, hazy memory. The world narrowed to the sterile conference rooms, the rustle of papers, the low hum of the copier, the relentless pursuit of truth through the dense fog of financial deception. My team at the startup stepped up, taking on more responsibility, allowing me to focus on the fight. Their support, even without knowing the full extent of what I was facing, was a lifeline. It was a reminder of what I was fighting for, not just financial justice, but the vindication of my work, my effort, my vision. He had tried to use my success against me. Now, that very success, and the intricate financial trail it created, would be the instrument of his undoing. The morning of the trial arrived like a dark, heavy curtain falling. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel strong, composed. No trace of the shattered woman he had tried to create. Elena was calm, confident. We reviewed the plan one last time, the steps laid out, the arguments sharp and precise. Walking into the courtroom felt surreal. The same room where I'd sat during the mediation, feeling small and defeated. Today felt different. Today, I wasn't the victim pleading for fairness. I was the claimant, presenting a case built on irrefutable facts and strategic leverage. The trial proceeded. Witnesses were called. Financial experts testified, tracing the flow of money, validating the source of the funds used for the condo and the expenses. Elena was masterful, dismantling Miller's attempts to obfuscate the facts, highlighting the deceptive nature of the transfers, the clear pattern of using funds from accounts directly benefiting from my startup's profits. When it was his turn to testify, he projected confidence, answering questions smoothly, deflecting, minimizing. He admitted to the affair, finally, under oath, though he downplayed the extent and duration. He admitted to buying the condo, but maintained it was a joint investment with a friend. Using marital funds, he stuck to his narrative, rigid and rehearsed. He seemed to believe he could charm or bluster his way through, just as he always had. Then came Elena's cross-examination. She started gently, leading him through his career history, his rise through the ranks, his pride in his partnership at the firm. He puffed up his chest, happy to talk about his success, the value of his position. He walked right into the trap. She then pivoted, asking about the sources of funds in the joint accounts, tracing them back to the substantial transfers from my company's operational accounts. He agreed, yes, some of that was there. Then she asked about the partnership agreement, specifically the clause about detrimental actions and reputational harm. He shifted in his seat, his easy confidence wavering. He admitted he was aware of such clauses, standard in partnership agreements, but dismissed them as boilerplate, rarely invoked. Elena's voice sharpened. Mr. Husband's last name, you testified that the condo purchase was an investment with a friend. You also testified that this friend is the woman you were having an affair with. You admit you used funds from accounts commingled with profits from your wife's highly successful startup, profits that were widely reported in the business press at the time, correct? He nodded, visibly uncomfortable. Yes, but those were marital funds. And this divorce, Elena continued, her voice rising slightly, the details of which involve you using significant sums of money, sourced at least in part from your wife's business profits, to fund a lavish lifestyle and purchase property for your mistress. This has become public knowledge, has it not? It has been reported in the tabloids, picked up by online news sources focusing on business and personal finance, correct? He stammered, glancing at Miller, who looked increasingly uneasy. I believe there have been some reports. Reports, Elena pressed, that detail your use of funds from your wife's business success to finance your infidelity and asset concealment? Reports that name you and your firm? Some have mentioned my firm. Yes, he conceded, his voice barely a whisper. And your firm, Elena stated, her voice ringing with conviction, a prestigious investment firm whose reputation is paramount, has a clause in its partnership agreement stating that actions by a partner that cause reputational damage or financial instability can result in the partner's share being devalued or even forfeited, does it not? The very clause you just dismissed as boilerplate. His face went ashen. He finally saw it. He saw the connection, the trap he had walked into. He had been so focused on hiding my money and shielding the condo that he hadn't considered how his actions, once exposed, could boomerang back and hit his own most valuable asset. His company. His partnership. The source of his pride and future wealth. Elena didn't let up. She presented evidence of the public reporting, the specific details that linked his actions to his firm's reputation. She brought in a legal expert on partnership agreements who testified about the likely interpretation and application of that specific clause in his agreement, given the circumstances. The climax wasn't a single moment, but a calculated dismantling. It was watching the dawning horror on his face as he realized the depth of his miscalculation. It was Miller's frantic, whispered conferences with his client, their earlier smugness completely evaporated. It was the quiet confidence radiating from Elena as she built her case, piece by piece, showing how his attempt to defraud me had exposed him to a far greater loss. My own testimony was brief, factual, and emotionally restrained. I recounted finding the letter, the subsequent discoveries, the confirmation of the affair, and the financial maneuvering. I spoke not of heartbreak, but of betrayal of trust, of financial violation. I let the evidence speak to the emotional depth of the damage. In her closing argument, Elena didn't just ask for a division of assets. She argued for a disproportionate distribution based on his financial misconduct, his attempt to hide assets, and the specific terms of his partnership agreement. She argued that his actions had not only harmed me but had potentially compromised his standing in his firm, impacting the very asset he sought to protect. Therefore, it was equitable, under the law, to consider the valuation of his partnership share in light of this, and award a significant portion of it to me, as compensation for the financial harm and the cost of uncovering his elaborate deception. Miller's closing argument was weak, defensive. He tried to pivot back to my alleged neglect, my focus on work, but it fell flat against the mountain of financial evidence and the undeniable proof of his duplicity. He still didn't seem to grasp the full implications of the partnership clause and how Elena had weaponized it. The judge's decision didn't come immediately. Days stretched into weeks. I returned to my company, trying to pick up the pieces, the legal battle still a heavy cloud overhead. The uncertainty was agonizing. Had we done enough? Had the judge seen through his lies? Had the strategy worked? Then the call came. Elena's voice was calm, measured, but I could hear the triumph underlying it. "The judge has ruled," she said. She found clear evidence of financial misconduct and fraudulent transfer. My heart hammered against my ribs. "And the condo?" "She awarded it to you," Elena said, "based on the source of the funds and his attempt to conceal it." A wave of shock, then a strange, cold satisfaction washed over me. The physical manifestation of his betrayal, now mine. But that wasn't the core of the strategy. "And his company?" I whispered. There was a brief pause. Then Elena said, "The judge agreed with our interpretation of the partnership agreement clause. She found that his actions constituted a significant breach, likely impacting the value of his share and potentially his future with the firm. Given the scale of the financial misconduct and the attempt to hide assets, the court has awarded you 100% ownership of his share in the partnership." I froze. 100%. Not a percentage of the value, but the entire stake. The golden goose. His identity. The thing he valued most, the thing he thought was untouchable, the thing he built his life around was now mine. I sat there in silence, the phone against my ear, the world outside my office window blurring. He hadn't just lost the condo. He had lost his entire professional future, taken from him as a direct consequence of the actions he took to spite me, to rob me, to build a new life using my earnings. He tried to take my company's profits to give to his mistress. The court gave me his company as retribution. It wasn't just karma. It was a surgical strike, precise and devastating. The aftermath wasn't jubilant celebration. It was hollow. Winning felt less like triumph and more like finally putting down a heavy burden. The immediate reaction wasn't joy, but exhaustion. The fight had taken so much, stripped away so many layers of who I was. He was, I heard later, apoplectic. His screaming, the sheer, blindsided rage, echoed through the court corridors, or so the whispers went. He hadn't seen it coming. He was so certain he had shielded his precious partnership that the focus would only be on the marital funds and the condo. He never imagined I could use his own corporate structure, his own carefully built professional world, as the weapon against him. He thought he was playing me. I ended up playing his entire life. The condo is an empty space now, a monument to a ruined marriage and a costly mistake. I haven't decided what to do with it. Sell it probably. Get rid of the last physical trace of that betrayal. His share of the partnership, that's more complex. I have lawyers and financial advisors figuring out the logistics. It's not something I want to integrate into my startup. That feels wrong. It was his world, built on principles he clearly didn't live by. But owning it, controlling it, it's a form of protection. It ensures he can't easily rebuild, can't just walk away and do this to someone else. The financial win was immense, far exceeding the money he stole. But the true victory wasn't the money. It was the vindication. It was proving that I saw him, that I wasn't the naive, oblivious wife he thought he could fool. It was taking the weapon he used against me, financial manipulation and utter disregard for trust, and turning it back on him with devastating accuracy. My life is quiet now. The storm has passed, but the landscape is irrevocably changed. The trust one had not just in him, but perhaps in the fundamental stability of things is gone. I am more cautious, more guarded. But I am also stronger. I navigated a betrayal that could have destroyed me, fought a battle against someone who knew all my vulnerabilities, and emerged not unscathed, but standing. The startup is thriving again. I'm reinvesting, expanding, building a future that is entirely my own, built on my own principles, my own hard work, my own vision. There are no hidden accounts, no secret transfers, no second lives being funded in the shadows. It is clean, transparent, and mine. The dry humor comes in waves now. Usually when I think about his face in court, that moment of absolute, shattering realization. He thought he was so smart. He thought he had it all figured out. He forgot that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one holding the blueprint to dismantle everything you think you own. He built a cage of lies with my money. I used the bars of that cage to build a ladder out, and then used the leftover pieces to knock his own world down. If this story hit close to home, or if you've ever had to fight for what's yours, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. And if you're still here, thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.